So let's get started. Once again, I'll be looking at the functionality on both the Canadian and US versions of working papers for this presentation. But I want to start by switching over to Chrome here and taking a look at the Caseware website. The 2015 tax patch is now available to download for a US version. It can be located on caseware.com by selecting Support, Working Papers, and Downloads. Here you can download the tax patch alone, or you can choose to download the SmartSync or non-sync versions of Caseware Working Papers, moving your teams up to build 2015.00.164 release, which does include the tax update for the US version. Now, to see all enhancements for this version, you can click on the Enhancements tab, fill in your appropriate version range, and see what else is new beyond the tax enhancements to determine if you want to move up to the 164 build, which we would recommend, or just download the US tax patch update. So I wanted to point that out. Again, that's on caseware.com through Support, Working Papers, and Downloads and Enhancements to get to this area. Make sure if you're not the person installing in your office that they're aware of this information, and you don't want to go ahead and install it on your own. You want to make sure that everybody is on the same version as you when you're working in files and you're collaborating with one another. So let's move out of this, and I'd like to go to the Canadian version first. So I have that in my remote desktop right here, and I'll maximize that up to the top of my screen. Now, we're going to start with a Tax Canada file. For my friends in the US, we're going to be doing the same thing with the US version. We'll be moving back and forth between the two as we work through the presentation. In this file, under Engagement Properties, we need to set the tax jurisdiction, and because this is going to be a Canadian file, we want to set it to Canada. And then we can choose the tax vendor we're using if it's on the list. You can go with not applicable. If it's not on the list, tax prep or profile are also available to us here. And I'm just going to leave it on not applicable for the time being. Once selected, we can click OK to continue. Canadian tax codes and General Index of Financial Information, or GIFI codes, are now available to be assigned to the accounts. This can be accomplished a number of different ways, but the easiest is to associate the tax codes or the GIFI codes with the map numbers, so when the accounts are mapped, the appropriate codes are automatically applied through the mapping process. Let's take a look at the mapping database. So that's found under Engagement tab once again in the Mapping option. And if I close my other users in the file here and scroll to the right-hand side, we can see the tax export code for Canadian tax codes and the GIFI code as well. Although there's a tax code column in the mapping database, which does allow for the assignment of tax export codes, most Canadian users simply stick with the General Index of Financial Information codes that we see here to export to their tax software. Now, GIFI codes can be assigned to map numbers in the mapping database by using the drop-down selector in the GIFI column. Later, when the map number is assigned to the account, all the associated properties are assigned, including the GIFI code. So if you're not using the mapping functionality of Caseware Working Papers, you can still assign the code using the Assign dialog under the Account tab by selecting Assign Groupings and Tax Export Codes, or Assign GIFI Codes, which allows the user to drag one or more accounts from the left side across to the right-hand side grouping. And finally, if you want to, GIFI codes can also be assigned to the trial balance directly by scrolling across to the column where the code is available and using the drop-down in that column to assign. I believe that as a best practice, the easiest way to do this is by setting it up in the mapping, because once it's mapped, then the GIFI code is automatically applied. Now I'm going to expedite the assignment of GIFI codes by using the AutoMap feature. That's found under Tools, Options, Mapping Autofill, and by clicking on the AutoMap Now button. Caseware Working Papers assigns the map numbers and related properties to the accounts at this point. In this case, AutoMap requires that the ratio class has been applied to the accounts prior to automapping. And normally I'd take the time to validate the AutoMap. I'm going to just click OK here. If I scroll back to the side, we'll see that the map numbers have been assigned and not yet validated. But I'm going to assume at this point that all accounts were properly mapped. Normally I'll go through and fix that. But because the GIFI code was part of the mapping structure, it too has now been applied to the account. Scrolling across to the Giphy column, we can see the Giphy number is now associated with the account number. This means that we're now able to create automatic documents that summarize the accounts based on Giphy code. To do that, let's return to the Document Manager. And I'm going to select Document 2.2 under Income Tax Returns. So I'll create a new tax document based on the Giphy code in the Income Tax Returns folder by selecting Home and Insert Line, and I can choose an automatic document. Click OK. This provides me with the Automatic Document Properties dialog where I can define the document type as, I'm going to go with trial balance in my document type here, and update to the trial balance by Giphy for the format. So when I go to account balances with group subtotals, and my balance type, well, I can choose whatever balance type I want, but the accounts, current period, it's all available to us here. It's my grouping that I want to set to Giphy. Now once that's in place, clicking OK places the document in my Document Manager, and if I open it up, we can see that we end up with a nice trial balance set up by Giphy code. And I've got some detail on the cash, as we can see here, separating out the two Giphy numbers for the cash balances. Prior to exporting the Giphy to the tax return, we can also check the Case View financial statement to mark any note disclosures that should be included in the export. Now to do that, if you've created your own financial statements in Case View, within the sections in the Case View document, and I'm just going to go to my notes here and go into my design mode. Each section has the ability, let's go back down to the notes, there we go, and I'll just select a section and modify that. We have the ability to include an export. Now if I check that to include an export, what will happen is when I export the Giphy codes, it gives me the option to also include the notes. And this is what determines whether a note is going to be included with that Giphy export or not. We'll just go OK and close and save the changes in that Case View document. Now keeping in mind, so far this has all been related to the Canadian tax. We will be getting to the US tax momentarily. Now at this point, I'm ready to export using the Giphy to my tax software. And I do that by selecting the Home tab, the Engagement tab, and Export, and selecting Giphy. Now this then allows me to make the desired selections, and notice the option to include Case View notes is available to us right here, which allows me to create the export file I need to import into the tax software using the tax software import functionality. Help is also available by clicking the Help button in the bottom right if necessary, and clicking OK completes the export, building that Giphy.gfi file. Now, there are some similarities in the US version of Working Papers. However, tax codes in the US version are a little more comprehensive. So let's take a look at it from the beginning using the US version of Working Papers. Let me minimize my remote desktop and come to my own desktop here. And I would like to open a file called US Tax. Tax USA, there we go, and open it up. I'll just take a moment to uncompress and take me into the Caseware Working Papers Document Manager. Once again, I'm going to close the user list to give me a little bit more room on the screen.